just want to kick it off with a question around the implementation of, let's say, open banking, payment initiation services in Europe. Ideal is often mentioned as an example of how things can go very fast and reach a market share of, in the Netherlands now, for 60% of all payments on e-commerce that are transacted for Ideal. But there is a difference. I mean, Ideal was developed by basically 3 banks with market share of more than 90%. That made agreements of how the systems would work. That's one. Secondly, there was an organization erected called Currents that is actually managing a scheme. So developed exactly how Ideal would work and how exceptions will be taken care of. I think that is missing in Europe. And just want to ask your perspective. With this type of, without the central scheme governance, with 4,500 banks that may want to make different decisions on how these APIs would look like, is this something that the market can work out? Or would we need something like a PSD3 or SEPA2 to get back on track? Dean, can I thought you on that one?
Yeah. I was actually trying to save Brendan. When he opened the bottle, a bit of glass came off and I was like, stop. Yeah, so I think I kind of talked quite a bit about the difference between similarity between India and Europe. And I think where there's been that kind of push towards creating that common standard, and it's not just the standard. A lot of time we talk about the standards of the technology standards, but it's more than that. It's about experience. It's about what the consumer expects, what they feel when they've made a purchase. Do they have any rights for chargebacks? It's things like that. And I think if that's not thought about holistically, and the challenge you've got in Europe is that all the different member states have got their different schemes and doing it slightly different. And I think Brendan did a great job of talking about some of the complexities that Konsentus are kind of dealing with and creating a solution. So long-winded way of saying, I think probably a PSD3 would, and we don't want to talk about it because we're all done in for 4 years after PSD2. But I don't know how else we're going to be able to get to that level of kind of conformity really across what an experience and standards look like across the entire value chain and make it work for a merchant retail payment in Europe.
Brad?
So, interestingly, there was something published last week where I think there was Deutche, I can't remember his surname now, from the EBA, said that PSD3 is not coming anytime soon. The amount of effort that's gone into where we are today has obviously been huge. And I think this drive towards standardisation is going to be driven by people like the ECB and the EPRB and so on, who are trying to bring in the API groups to try and harmonise and standardisation across Europe. I don't think there's a lot of stomach for PSD3 at the moment. I think there's been so much time, effort, and let's be blunt, money spent on where we are today. I don't think there's an appetite for most banks and financial institutions to invest even further as we speak. It's to try and get this current phase in stable and successful before you move on to the next stage.
Just to complete and have a different angle, I've been participating in the Berlin Group meeting last time in Paris in December, and we are part now of the Euro Retail Payments Board at the European Commission, and clearly right now what we see is that, as you said, there's a lot of efforts put in the process, and I think we're moving towards a standard. Despite my French colleague, I'm French. Bank, which has a different idea in mind at some point of the standard, but still, if you look at the German landscape, that's 1,500 banks. So yes, at the end of the day, we'll come to some kind of standard. It will not be on the September 14th. They will be in the upcoming month. Then the word scheme is becoming more and more part of the discussion, whether at the Berlin Group, EBA level, because, as you said, and you're right, at the end of the day, that will then kind of give a framework to operate, and like with a very simple set of rules. Right now, what we see is that we are in a transition phase where we are learning by walking or running, and that will come to I hope, to a unified user interface, user experience, which is I think the idea from the very beginning is quite important in that regard.
If I may, because something that I didn't mention about IATA Pay. IATA Pay is something that we are, again, is going to be developed or implemented in all those markets where there will be like an open banking environment. And we see that, and it's connected to something that is mentioned before. At the end of the day, the way to articulate an open banking logic, let's say in that way, is like in a centralized or a decentralized way. We see that in Europe with the PSD2 or even with the open banking in UK, which is in somehow this centralized way, there are plenty of challenges that which are going to impact the penetration of the open banking, which there are other alternative, which is more in a centralized way with a clear scheme such as India, that basically at the end of the day, the results are showing that the penetration is huge. So the question here, and at the end of the day, is from our side is a no-brainer that the open banking logic or solutions based on open banking is going to be the future. The way in which the countries will be articulating the open banking, either decentralized or centralized, is going to have an impact in the speed in terms of penetration.
Okay, now suppose we have solved the supply side issues. So we have the central scheme or the market has worked out to develop all the APIs. How are we going to convince the customers to start using these new payment methods?
So I think I guess the challenge is if we go back to our friends and family, no one says I want open banking or cares anything about that topic or PSD2. We've got to find the killer app. I don't believe it's been found. Account aggregation, I don't believe, is the answer and the whole reason for doing this. And it has to be better than other ways of making payments. At the moment, we have card schemes, we have cash, we have bank-to-bank transfers. If we're going to do something different, it's got to be better. Now, is that cheaper? Is that faster? Is that safer? Whatever the criteria is. But at the moment, I haven't seen anybody who's come up with something that is going to materially be different, which means that we can convince, people outside of our industry that this is actually worth doing.
I've seen sort of two schools of thought on this. I think your points are spot on. You've kind of got, it's got to be the proposition. It's got to be simple. I don't know. I use this because it's easier. Typically, I mean, we're all lazy at the end of the day. We don't want to make it hard for ourselves. So, or I'm getting something back, and I don't want to have to go to effort to get something back. I just want it to happen. So I don't think anybody's really cracked that yet. But that's kind of more that kind of the loyalty sort of side of things. But then other markets like India, and we're seeing this the US as well, where they're actually focusing more on do something like a person-to-person first. And I think in the UK, we did a terrible job of that with PM. We really shot ourselves in the foot on that. But that would have been really kind of delivering those new services, because then it gets to the point where you're creating a habit. So it's either do you do something that's a new proposition that creates a value, to your point, or it's create a habit. And I think that's the create the habit is what we've seen in India.
So to complete the picture is what we do on top of whatever is being managed and driven by Javier for IATA Pay for the airline industry. On our side, my team and I, we're spending our time just spending some time with the utility companies, retail companies, payment service providers, car companies, just to identify all the potential use cases on the market and bring this up as, okay, these are the different use cases. We bring this up to the Berlin Group, to the EBA, to the European Commission to say, okay, if you want to develop a sustainable and very efficient way, new payment solution or way of paying, you need to integrate multiple optionalities, so to pay one single payment, to do one single payment, but also bulk of payments, regular installments, etc., etc. And this is where I think that you will drive the market adoption by having a multi-sectoral penetration of this solution with multiple optionalities.
Yeah, I think a good example of that could be China, right? So WeChat Pay and Alipay. It's basically driven from the ecosystem. So it's not about payment, it's about all kinds of services that are enabled by a payment function.
In terms? Okay. Well.
Sorry, I think you're right, but I think we're just slightly overlooking something here. That we've got 31 member states within Europe. Every country is very different in the way it pays today in the services that are available. We've got some countries that use Softfort and Trustly and so on that are used to push payments. UK, we're not. We're a much more card-based transacting environment. So I think one of the big challenges is convincing consumers of the value and the benefit and the safety of using these services. For 40 years, we've been telling people not to share credentials. Only share credentials with your bank. And then come September, we're going to throw that away and say, this is all safe. It's going to take time. It's going to take time for consumers to trust and engage in these new services. Where I think the biggest opportunity lies actually is in small, medium enterprises, treasury management type services. I think they'll grasp those quite quickly because there's value and benefit immediately for those businesses. And it's not necessarily their own money.
A few comments about adoption. I believe that in terms of adoption, first of all, something which is going to be critical is the user experience. When you are looking at, for example, in the way that open banking will be articulated in Europe, there is going to depend, the user experience is going to depend a lot on how the customer's bank are going to manage the authorization process. So first of all, from the banking side, they need to see any kind of interest to monetize in order just to make any kind of investment in order just to streamline, to make, again, a streamlined authorization process. That is something which is important. Then second, and we are talking about IATA Pay, obviously how fast basically you want to manage the adoption is going to depend on the way in which, keep in mind that this is something that you mentioned already, is like there are behaviors at the end of the day that you need to educate basically your customers. So the education will require perhaps some kind of incentivize or promotions because the savings from a financial point of view are clear. Third is time. Again, the penetration of the adoption will require of some time, but just think on some models. For example, we are mentioning about Ideal. Is when you are looking at how Ideal works after obviously 10 years, the situation is the opposite. If you are a corporate trying to do any kind of e-commerce and you are not offering Ideal, perhaps you are losing the selling. So the way is perhaps, again, at the end of the day, these solutions will require time. The point is going to be in the hands of the corporates offering solutions like this, based on this, just the way in which we are going to incentivize or promote is how fast the adoption will happen.
Yeah, incentive in Ideal, remember that those times when you were still on e-commerce as a customer, many Dutch customers didn't have a credit card, right? That's one incentive. The only way to actually do e-commerce was Ideal. The second one is that at that time I was surcharging online. So it was kind of a negative incentive. So if you'd use your credit card, you'd pay like $2.50 for a transaction, and Ideal was for free, right? So there was this clear incentives for consumers to make that change. Today, if I'm a customer and I just can take my card out and put it on file and make a payment, what's the incentive of using something like IATA Pay? Is there would you use loyalty or other things to try to seduce people away from their usual habits?
I mean, in our case, obviously, the way to incentivize is going to depend on each airline, the way in which they are going to want to incentivize or to promote this payment form. Something that obviously from the team who are working on IATA Pay, the idea is just to develop or to improve as much as possible the value proposition in terms of building features, again, the pay late, the installments, and even additional features will be incorporated into the IATA Pay solution in order just to work together with airlines to make a strong value proposition. But the way to incentivize and to promote is going to depend on each airline. And at the end of the day, when you are looking at the potential savings that the IATA Pay will be, or solutions like this will be bringing, at the end of the day, you have to make your numbers, and depending on the savings and how fast you want to get that savings is the way in which you are going to perhaps to put more incentives or to promote more or less. I mean, it's a decision of not only the airline industry, but all corporates needs to make in the future.
I think it lies in the hands of the merchants. That most of the discussion we have is really about how much they want to promote and to put forward this solution versus the other ones. The question will be also in September when you have the second factor authentication process in place, how it will impact other payment solutions as well. And if today I'm getting some incentive, or my customer journey, if you go into a website where you have some e-wallets positioned first and then other means of payments, that's also an approach that some of the merchants will take. You're not allowed anymore to differentiate by price, as it was done in the past. So yeah, that will come to the sales, marketing, e-commerce, and financial and treasury departments to find okay, what's the right and the balanced approach towards this new payment solution. What are the benefits in terms of cash application, reconciliation, working capital, and risk? I saw a question on risk just before on the screen. So that will be very the equation that they need to fulfill. And as one final point is, we're talking about B2C a lot, and actually there's a huge online market, e-commerce market, where this is a B2B or B2 small b, where there's a more closed environment with a lot of potential. And the question is not potentially the price, but it's really about the cash application, reconciliation, working capital.
Yeah, find the right use cases. Okay, just one couple of questions from the audience. We're scrolling back now. So this question is, well, we can answer this a different one. So how open is this PSD2 banking really, according to the panel? So we're discussing open banking. Is it open? Or is it?
One challenge I thought we've spotted with the open banking and talked to a few people about this is you've got 4,500 banks across Europe. And then so if you want to connect into all those 4,500 banks to, in essence, do what you do today with the card rail, it's a lot of integration work. So then you sprout up TPPs that can collect bunches of banks. Then the next word we're going to be using is interoperability. So I think that's a bit of a challenge. And then some of the banks, if they're big banks, maybe they've got several brands within a bank, and they've all implemented these standards. So STET, Berlin Group, CMA 9, IBA Pay, and they're all doing these standards, but they're all doing them slightly differently. And the qualities of service are different as well. And even within a big bank, often their brands are doing them slightly differently. So I think, yes, open, probably more for a developer. It's slightly controversial.
I believe that this, I will answer like, it's extremely open. This is something that he mentioned already. Right now, it's nice. It's nice just to have this kind of open banking or this kind of the way to articulate open banking in a decentralized way. But at the time, it's bringing important challenges in terms of connections and differences between, and just to put together and connect together among all the banks, it's going to be quite challenging. Perhaps even this kind of centralized approach that was followed by other regulations, it might be even a better solution.
Yeah, I spoke to one of the payment initiation service providers already in the market, probably one of those who I mean, and he said, people say it's not rocket science. Well, it is rocket science to connect to all these different banks with all their different procedures, the different specifications. So, do you think, Julian, you're in that position, right? You're a technology company with a banking license, right? Is that something you recognize? Is that complicated, or?
Yeah, and I was just reading the other question that was up there as well, which is, is there going to be a single API standard? And I think the answer to that is no. I'm old enough to remember VHS and Betamax, and Betamax was the better technology by far. VHS got it. So what will be the standard? Will it be through some industry initiatives? Will it be because Amazon or Google dictate what the standard is? Will it be dictated by the central banks or whatever? And I don't think we know the answer to that problem, which makes it even more expensive than what we're going through at the moment. And it probably also demonstrates that I think if you're in one of the bigger banks with a large technology budget, then you're going to be spending a lot of money trying to do some big bets. and that's going to be very, very expensive. And at the end of the day, customers are going to pay for it.
What would be interesting is, I think, to answer the first question was, March 14th is going to be a good proxy to know how much open the PSD2 is. That's how many banks are providing the APIs in which format. And the second, if you think about that, how open the data from a bank perspective. So on our side, we launched our portal in November. It's called DB Developer. So if you are a developer, you can create your own profile, you can connect, you have a sandbox environment to start operating. So that's two ways to answer the question.
I've got to ask a question. How open do you want open banking to be? We're talking about people's data. We're talking about sensitive information. It's got to have a degree of regulation around it. You don't want everyone and anyone just accessing that data without any controls over it whatsoever. So sometimes I think you have to be careful for what you wish for.
Yeah. Somebody just remarked, and it's a really good point, you know, people are, we trained consumers to protect their personal data and not share it with anyone. So if they never start sharing and something would go wrong, it would basically also kind of undermine the trust in the financial service industry, isn't it? Yeah.
But isn't it, I mean, today my credit card details are all over the places. I mean, I stored my credit card in many things. That's more dangerous for me than to use my IBAN at some point. So, because if I give you my IBAN, you can do not a lot with it. My credit card details with back and forth the card, yes. Yep. So the question is where we are right now, what will be the standard, and also the question around GDPR, which are very significant. But the application and the usage of the data is true for not only open banking as such, but then all of the services that are in our industry, I would say.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting if you look at the vision that the Australian regulator has for open banking, it's much, much broader than what we view in Europe today. So I think we're on the start of a journey. Who knows where we'll be in 5 years' time? Who knows where the industry will be in 10 years' time? I suspect it would probably be pretty unrecognisable from where it is today.
And I believe that you mentioned something that we have started the journey. I mean, this is something when you are looking worldwide, is like there are plenty of countries working on the same thing. Just again, you mentioned Australia, US, Canada. There are plenty of countries right now. That is the global trend. So at the end of the day, if everybody is working in the same direction, is because there is some logic behind. Then the key point is how to articulate in the best way is going to be a matter of time.
Another question here, and that I just kind of generalized it. So the question is, what's the average cost of an instant transaction in India?
I just thought you were going to skip.
Not a rehearsal, Dean, but will it make payments cheaper if we go to instant payments?
That's a better question.
To cards?
Answer that one, I've got like a deck that talks about all the different price points of cards and different payment mechanisms. And UPI as an overlay cost is significantly cheaper than a card transaction. It's one of the key benefits. So to answer your question, yes, it is significantly cheaper. There are different tiers as well in terms of, so it all depends on who's paying who a fee. I will tell you, it took a while to get my head around the fee model, because there's one for P2P and there's one for P2M, and they've got different tiers. And because it's a four-party model with a peer bank, a peer-E bank, a peer-E PSP, and a peer-E PSP with a scheme in the middle, and then WhatsApps and other merchants, and it's like, okay, takes a while with all the arrows. I'm happy to take this one offline if anybody's fascinated by it, but ultimately it is cheaper. But what it's driving the banks to do is ramp up on the acquiring side more transactions, because the more transactions they get, the more money they can make. And P2P, in the true sense of the term in India, is a loss-making activity.
How about risk? There's another question coming up here. Is there fraud in India on those transactions?
So in order to kind of make firstly, all the security you got with the PIN is baked into the rail. So you tap in, let's say you bank with State Bank of India. So your account's over there, but you use HDFC's bank app. You log into the app. Okay, so first of all, you're logging into a registered bank, security check to get you in there. Then you want to move funds from State Bank of India to some other account over here. You've got to connect to State Bank, so you just literally drop down, find the bank, type in your PIN to that bank. That's all encrypted, goes through the scheme rails until it goes to the side and then is de-encrypted. So all the MAC and everything's all kind of locked all the way through. So it's so the pin's never really in the clear apart from when you're tapping it in on the glass. So it's supposed to be fairly secure. I think that they had plans around putting in biometrics, but they've deferred from that because if you have your thumbprint and the glass is wet, as we've seen, it's not very good. So they want to move to facial recognition, which is creating other variables they've got to assess first. But I'm told it's fairly secure. There are still some security gaps. I know State Bank, for example, have taken our fraud solution, and there's been a bit of work required to get that right for that market.
Okay, so asked the question also this morning. 5 years ahead from now, we're sitting here again. I think, yeah, we are all going to make it before we retire. Will we see lots of people in the cars industry being jobless because instant payments or PSD2 payments has taken over? What do you think? How fast is the transition going?
Thank you, guys. Thanks. I'm the first to answer this one. Thank you.
With the first noise.
I mean, is it like any change? So, if in 5 years' time we look at a country like Netherlands, we talked about it, but open banking will be normal. I will say that I will use potentially an app. Will come back to me with some advices on using my bank data to go for savings. It's already the case actually with some apps, and or implement some financial solution. I'm a corporate. I will potentially get the same. So you will have like a different usage and a different angle to that. This will not overcome some of the risk attached to any type of payments, and especially the compliance and all the KYC around that, especially for corporates, not retail as such. So more and more you find some risk assessment of some of the clients. So we talk about KYCC, know your clients. So maybe like there will be an additional sideline additional work on that field.
Yeah, I'm going to answer that question in something that perhaps everybody in this room is familiar. It was like 5 years ago when the fintechs started, basically their activity, and basically the common question was, fintechs will replace banks? Again, after 5 years, again, we have identified at the end of the day is they are co-creating, they are partnering together, and they are making stronger the sector together, working fintechs and banks. At the end of the day, I believe that, again, obviously the business and the payment solution and the different payment alternatives in the way in which they are offering the solutions, they are going to change totally. And even cars, they are going to evolve. Even they are already jumping into solutions like this. I mean, the sector is going to evolve, and in 5 years' time, obviously, there will be perhaps the same or different corporates offering payment forms, but in a different way. I mean, I believe that they are going to evolve.
Thanks. Brendan, your perspective?
I don't have a comment on that one, I'm afraid.
No?
That's out of my knowledge sphere.
So I think if you look at 5 years' time, it's a really tough thing to predict. So hopefully this isn't being recorded and played back for us in 5 years' time. I think instant payments are going to drive a lot of different use cases. I said when I was talking about, I think we'll get paid differently. I think people will consume products differently. We know we're going through a whole range of growth in the subscription market, but what is next? How are we going to pay for goods and services? I think your points earlier on the B2B is fundamentally different than B2C. And I think we need to separate those two when we're talking about sort of 5-year predictions. I think some of I'm going to call what you guys do as more of a closed loop, but industry to industry, I think there'll be more of those happening and more interesting where there's real benefit to the business, the merchants or the consumers. So I think there's going to be, I see instant payments as a building block, and that building block we have yet to work out as an industry how it's going to get used and where the exciting products and services are going to be for consumers and for businesses.
I'm going to just answer from a consumer point of view rather than the business. I think you guys have got the business side covered. From a consumer's perspective, I think it's going to boil down to the context of which the payment is going to take place. So that's going to be merchant category code specific, it's going to be geographically specific, it's going to be what the consumer expects. So I think it's going to depend on, so I'll give you an example, e-commerce, for example, is an obvious, e-commerce, m-commerce is an obvious digitized kind of environment where having some sort of request for payment that goes through to your bank app, that you make a payment, yeah, okay, that's fairly straightforward. So I could see that happening. I could see it happening in those markets who actually make an attempt. I could see it happening in specific industry, airline, perfect industry. I think telecoms, they're really interested in that as well. It would seem to make sense. You've got your mobile network operator, you've got this mobile capability. So I think we're going to see it in pockets over the next 5 years, depending on those sorts of areas, to be honest. Does that make sense? I don't think we're going to get a one ring to fit them all. I certainly don't expect that in 5 years.
And in balance, are you going to answer the question as well?
It would be interesting if somebody would know where the market's going. Then I would ask, what are you doing here, right? Because you will be out there being rich. But fact is, maybe recapping this, summarizing that, we're building new rails. We don't know exactly what's going to run over those rails or how the network is actually going to be implemented, but there's a lot of change going on, and that the dynamics of the market is going to change. It's something that is clear from the presentation that we have seen this afternoon and also the last session. So I think payments will continue to be extremely dynamic and interesting, and looking forward to see what propositions are going to be successful and which ones were for the
time will tell.
The disposition only. Time will tell. Thank you to the panel for your participations, and thanks to the audience for being so attentive.
Thank you.
Yes.